When my wife passed, the lawyer slid a folder across the table and told me I had inherited a boarded-up diner off Route 9, while my daughter got the lake house worth $2 million. She looked me dead in the eye that afternoon, called me a burden nobody asked for, and gave me 30 days to clear out of the only home I had known for 41 years. I had nowhere to go but that dead diner 2 hours north, but when I turned the key in that rusted lock and the door creaked open, what I saw inside made my knees go out from under me. I need to tell you exactly how this happened. If you have ever been treated like you stopped mattering the day you got old, listen to me. The heart of this is real. The reading of the will took place in a law office in downtown Boston. It was the kind of place with thick carpet that swallows your footsteps, and the conference table so long it feels like you are sitting at opposite ends of a courtroom. My daughter Chloe sat across from me with her husband. The two of them were leaning forward like they were about to win a prize on a game show. I sat alone on my side. The attorney, a calm woman named Evelyn Voss, opened a leather folder, put on her reading glasses, and started. It had been 9 days since I lost Eleanor. 9 days of casseroles I couldn't eat. Of neighbors squeezing my hand of my daughter, telling everyone within earshot that she was handling everything. Mostly. That meant she had already changed the locks on the lake house and started measuring the windows for new drapes. Evelyn cleared her throat and began reading. We proceed with the last will and testament of Eleanor Jane Whitfield, executed 11 months ago. 11 months. Eleanor had drawn this up while she was still strong enough to drive herself to appointments. She knew something was coming. She had time. Evelyn kept reading. Her voice perfectly level. To my daughter Chloe, I leave the property on Blackwood Lake, including the residence and the boathouse. Current appraised value $2 million. I also leave her the investment accounts held at Vanguard, valued at approximately $1.4 million, and the proceeds of my life insurance policy, $300,000. Chloe let out a little gasp and grabbed her husband's wrist. He didn't smile, but his eyes did the thing eyes do when a man is already spending money in his head. I did the arithmetic without meaning to. Old habit from 36 years of teaching high school math. Nearly 3.8 million. All of it hers. Then Evelyn looked at me. To my husband, Arthur. I leave the commercial property located on Route 9 in Ashfield. The structure, formerly a diner, and the 11 acres on which it sits. County tax valuation $96,000. The room went dead quiet. My daughter blinked, sitting back in her chair.
Wait, that's it?
That is the entirety of the bequest to your father, yes. Chloe laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh.
A broken down hash house in the middle of nowhere. That's what she left him. She left him a parking lot and a building with no roof.
I should have said something. I should have stood up for Eleanor, because Eleanor didn't do anything by accident in her whole life. But my throat had closed up and the words wouldn't come. Why the diner? She had never mentioned it. In 41 years, she had never once driven me out to Ashfield to see it. Evelyn slid an envelope across the table to me. It was cream-colored, heavy, with my name on the front, in Eleanor's slanted, stubborn handwriting. There is a sealed letter for you. Your wife was very specific. You are to open it at the property, not before.
This is unbelievable. I am calling a lawyer of my own.
That is your right, but I will save you the retainer fee. Your mother's estate plan was drafted by one of the most careful attorneys in the state. It will hold. Contesting it will cost you a great deal and change nothing.
You know what, Dad? Enjoy your diner. But don't come crawling to me when you figure out Mom left you a tax bill and a tetanus shot.
The door shut behind them. For a long moment, Evelyn and I just sat there. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Your wife loved you very much. I worked with her for over a year on this. She thought about every comma. She reached into the folder and set a key in front of me. An old brass thing, the kind they stopped cutting decades ago. This opens the diner. Ashfield is about 2 hours west. The address is in the deed. She told me you would have questions. She said to tell you, trust the diner, everything you need is there. I drove back to the lake house that evening. Except it wasn't my house anymore. Chloe owned it now. The same kitchen where Eleanor and I had eaten breakfast for 2 decades. The same bedroom where she had held my hand on her last morning and whispered 4 words I didn't understand. Trust the diner, sweetheart. I had thought it was the medication talking. I had kissed her forehead and told her I would. When I got back, Chloe and her husband were already living there. She didn't knock on the guest room door. She just opened it, holding a piece of paper. This is where the floor fell out from under me.
This is a 30-day notice to vacate.
What is this?
Legal and official. We need the space. We are starting a family.
You are evicting me.
I am giving you a month to figure out your living situation. That is more than generous considering the circumstances.
This is my home. This has been my home for 41 years.
It was your home. Now it is my property. Mom's will was very clear about that. You heard the lawyer.
Your mother has been gone for 9 days. 9 days, Chloe.
And the mortgage still needs to be paid. The property taxes are due. I have contractors coming in tomorrow to look at the floors in the main living room. You being here complicates things.
I am your father. I am not a complication. I am your father.
You are a burden nobody asked for.
Look at me when you say that.
I am looking right at you. You are a burden. You have been walking around this house like a ghost for a year, letting mom do everything, letting mom manage the accounts, letting mom plan the estate. And look where it got you. She left you a garbage dump on a highway.
She left me a property.
She left you a joke. And she left me the responsibility of cleaning up the rest of this life. I am not letting you drag me down.
I took care of her every single day. I bathed her, I fed her, I slept in the chair next to her bed. Where were you?
I was managing the real world, something you never knew how to do.
You were waiting for her to die.
Watch how you speak to me in my house.
I paid for this house. I worked 36 years to put that roof over your head. I taught math to ungrateful kids so you could have a bedroom looking out over the water.
And then mom legally transferred it to me. The past doesn't matter. The paperwork matters. The notice is on the dresser. 30 days.
Where am I supposed to go?
To the diner. Isn't that what the lawyer said? Go to Ashfield or go to a facility. There are places that take people with limited incomes. I can leave some brochures on the counter for you tomorrow.
You want to put me in a home?
I want you out of my house.
I need time to sort through my things. My clothes, your mother's photographs.
Don't take anything that isn't strictly yours when you go. I made an inventory today while you were out.
An inventory.
The silver, the art mom's jewelry. It stays. It was in the house, it conveys with the estate.
Those are my memories. The silver was a wedding gift from my parents.
It belongs to the estate. If I see it missing, I will call the police and report it stolen.
You would call the police on your own father over forks and knives.
Try me.
I don't even know who you are anymore. The little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder in the car. I don't see her anywhere in your face.
She grew up. She realized her father was weak, and her mother was the only one with any sense. 30 days, Dad. Have your bags packed.
I won't leave a mess.
See that you don't. And keep your door closed when the contractors are here. I don't want them stepping over you in the hallway.
I hear you.
Good. We understand each other.
We do. We completely understand each other now. The next 2 weeks were a slow, agonizing demolition of the life I had built. I became a ghost haunting my own hallways. I would come downstairs in the morning to find a contractor's truck parked diagonally across the driveway, blocking my old sedan, inside the house. Strangers were tearing up the very foundations of my memories. One morning, I walked into the den and found 2 men in heavy work boots pulling Eleanor's extensive collection of literature and history books off the custom oak shelves I had built for her 20 years ago. They were not packing them into boxes, they were dumping them indiscriminately into thick black contractor trash bags. I stood there holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, watching decades of my wife's intellectual life being treated like construction debris. When I asked them what they were doing, they simply pointed to the porch. Chloe stood out there in a sharp business blazer, sipping an espresso, directing the demolition like a foreman on a job site. I stepped out and told her those were her mother's prized books. She didn't even look at me, she just kept her eyes on her tablet and flatly stated that they were dusty and that the space was being gutted to put in a modern wet bar for entertaining. A few minutes later, one of the workers walked out carrying a heavy sterling silver picture frame. It was a photograph of Eleanor and me taken at a small diner counter in Vermont during our honeymoon. We were both so incredibly young in that picture. Our faces flushed with the cold and the sheer joy of being together. The worker asked Chloe if he should toss it. Chloe glanced at the frame, noted the sterling silver, and declared that the frame belonged to the estate, but the photo was trash. She gestured toward the massive industrial dumpster sitting on my front lawn. I watched the physical evidence of my honeymoon disappear around the corner in the hands of a complete stranger, and something deep inside my chest cracked clean down the middle. It got significantly worse before I finally left. 3 days before my 30-day notice expired, I was out by the curb, hauling a small cardboard box of my personal clothes to the trunk of my car. That was when I noticed a thick manila folder sticking out of the blue recycling bin. My son-in-law had been aggressively throwing out decades of our household paperwork all week, clearing out the filing cabinets in the home office. I pulled the folder out. The tab was labeled in Chloe's distinct looping handwriting. It read, "Dad. Placement options." My hands went numb as I opened it right there on the driveway. Inside were glossy, heavily manipulated brochures for a place called Oak Haven Senior Residence, located out near the industrial outskirts of Springfield. I had heard of Oak Haven. Everyone had. It was notorious. I pulled out my phone and searched it. It sat at a dismal 2.1 stars online. The promotional photos in the brochure showed a depressing dining hall lit by harsh flickering fluorescent lights with elderly residents slumped in wheelchairs, parked in front of a muted daytime television. But that was not the worst part. Underneath the brochures was a printed contract. My name was already typed into the resident designation field. It assigned me to a shared occupancy room in Wing C. The monthly rate was listed as $2,900, which would drain my small pension entirely. And then my stomach dropped into a bottomless abyss. The signature line at the bottom of the pre-admission agreement was dated. The date was exactly 3 weeks before Eleanor died. While my wife was still alive, while she was upstairs in a rented hospice bed fighting for every single breath. My daughter had already been touring substandard facilities and signing preliminary paperwork to file me away in a place that smelled of bleach-boiled cabbage and absolute forgetting. I stood by the recycling bin and photographed every single page of that folder. I took pictures of the contract, the brochures, and the printed emails attached to the back. I read the online reviews on my phone, scrolling through horror stories of men being left in soiled beds for 12 hours. Of wedding rings mysteriously vanishing from nightstands, while the administrative staff merely shrugged and cited liability waivers. I meticulously documented it all. And then I slid the entire folder under the spare tire in the trunk of my car, hiding it away. I said absolutely nothing to Chloe. You might be wondering why I didn't just pack my car and leave right then and there, why I endured staying under the roof of people who actively wanted to erase my existence for another 3 excruciating days. The truth is Evelyn, the estate attorney, had told me something very specific in the hallway after the will reading. I had held on to her words like a lifeline. She had pulled me aside and whispered that the diner was legally protected in a way I wouldn't fully understand until I read Eleanor's private letter. More importantly, Evelyn warned me that if I left the house even one single day before the legal date on that eviction notice, Chloe's aggressive lawyers could argue that I had voluntarily abandoned the marital residence. They could use it to complicate the execution of the estate, tie me up in endless probate litigation, and drain what little resources I had left. Evelyn had told me to keep my hands completely clean. She said Eleanor had anticipated this ruthlessness. So I forced myself to stay. I counted the remaining hours. I slept on top of the covers of the guest bed fully clothed. On the final morning, with a massive commercial moving truck idling out front to deliver Chloe's new designer furniture, I packed exactly 1 duffel bag of my clothes, 1 small box of my favorite paperback novels, and Eleanor's honeymoon photo, which I had quietly fished out of the rotting garbage in the dumpster late the previous night and tucked safely into my winter coat. Everything else in that massive house they could keep. Chloe met me on the front porch as I was walking out. She was holding a certified bank check. She held it out to me and told me it was for $20,000. She told me to cash the check. Sign over the deed to the Ashfield diner to her and consider us square. She tried to convince me that the dilapidated building was a massive liability, a tax burden that would ruin my remaining years, and that I would eventually thank her for taking it off my hands. I looked at the check for a very long time. Then I looked up into her face, desperately searching for any trace of the little girl I had raised, the girl who used to beg me to read her just one more bedtime story. I couldn't find her anywhere. The eyes looking back at me were entirely cold, calculating, and devoid of empathy. I calmly took the check from her fingers. I deliberately tore it in half. Then I placed the halves together and tore it in half again. I placed the torn pieces back into her palm. I told her I would take my chances, and I walked to my car. I drove west out of Boston, merging onto Route 9, and I never once looked back in the rearview mirror. The drive to Ashfield took just over 2 hours. The landscape gradually shifted from the dense, frantic suburban sprawl of the greater Boston area to the quiet, forgotten mill towns of central Massachusetts. The highway eventually narrowed, giving way to rolling hills, long stretches of nothing but ancient, moss-covered stone walls, bare winter trees, and the occasional hand-painted wooden sign on the shoulder advertising farm fresh eggs for $3 a dozen or split firewood for sale. The diner sat far back from the main road on a sprawling gravel lot that looked much smaller and far more desolate than I had ever pictured in my mind. It was a long, low, rectangular building with a severely sagging tin roof. The large front windows had been completely papered over from the inside with yellowing newspaper. Out by the road stood a tall, rusted metal pole holding a faded, weather-beaten sign. You could barely read the faded painted letters. It might have once said "Roses," but the paint had chipped away so badly that only the ghost of the letters remained. I parked my car near the front steps and just sat there for a good 10 minutes, listening to the engine ticking as it cooled in the freezing air. Behind the diner, 11 acres of land rolled back toward the dense, overgrown tree line that had entirely gone to wild brush and invasive saplings. It was the exact kind of unremarkable land you would drive past your entire life and never once register in your memory. Looking at it through the windshield, I thought my daughter might have been right about one thing. It looked entirely worthless. I stepped out into the biting wind and walked up the creaking wooden steps. I took the heavy brass key Evelyn had given me and slid it into the rusted deadbolt. The key turned hard, requiring me to put my shoulder into the door, and then it finally gave with a loud metallic clack. Inside, the air was freezing cold. It smelled heavily of stale dust, decades-old fryer grease, and field mice. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the papered windows, I saw a classic diner layout. There was a long formica counter lined with cracked red vinyl stools. Along the far wall sat a row of booths with their upholstery split down the middle, spilling yellow foam. In the back, visible through a serving window, was a small commercial kitchen with a massive stainless steel hood and a flat-top griddle that had gone completely orange with rust over the years. But what caught my immediate attention was the counter. Right in the center, set out as neatly as a formal place setting at a dinner table, sat 2 envelopes. One was thick and securely sealed with dark red wax. The other was a standard envelope with my name written in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. Next to them sat a high-powered, heavy-duty battery lantern. I walked over, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty room. My hands were not steady. I picked up the envelope with the red wax seal. I spoke aloud to the empty room, asking my late wife to show me what this was all about. I broke the wax seal, pulled out the heavy paper, and read the brief note. It directed me to walk past the kitchen and find a small back office. It told me to look behind the heavy metal filing cabinet against the far wall, where I would find a hidden crawl space under the floorboards. I followed her instructions precisely. I found the cramped windowless office. I put my back against the wall and pushed the incredibly heavy steel filing cabinet aside. It screeched violently across the cracked linoleum floor. Right where it had been sitting, there was a perfect square cut into the floorboards, complete with a recessed heavy iron ring pull. I hooked my fingers into the ring and heaved it upward. A wave of damp, earthy air hit my face. A short, sturdy wooden ladder descended into the pitch-black darkness. I clicked on the heavy lantern I had brought from the counter and carefully climbed down into the earth. The crawl space was very low, forcing me to crouch. It had a packed dirt floor, perfectly dry, smelling of old soil and secrets. Over in the far corner, carefully covered by a thick waterproof canvas tarp, sat a heavy green metal military-style strongbox, secured with a massive brass padlock. The same brass key from Evelyn opened it. I turned the lock, unlatched the heavy metal clasps, and opened the lid. What I found inside that box would completely rewrite the last 2 years of my life and reveal the absolute masterpiece of protection my wife had engineered while she was dying. I sat down right there in the freezing dirt of the crawl space, the harsh white beam of the battery lantern illuminating the contents of the heavy green strongbox. My hands were trembling violently, not from the cold, but from the sheer weight of what I was looking at. Neatly arranged inside the metal box were 4 thick, heavily stuffed manila folders. Each one was meticulously labeled in Eleanor's careful, precise handwriting. The first folder had a bright red plastic tab and was simply labeled Embezzlement/Evidence. The second folder carried a dark blue tab and read Conspiracy, Vance. The third folder, marked with a green tab, was titled Trust Documents and Deed. The final folder had a yellow tab and was labeled .Highway Project. Resting gently on top of all these files was another sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope and pulled out 3 pages of Eleanor's personal stationery. I read her letter by the beam of the lantern, completely isolated from the world above. In the letter, Eleanor spoke to me with a fierce protective urgency. She wrote that if I was reading these words, it meant she was gone. And our daughter had likely already made her move to take the Asheville diner from me. Eleanor told me there were 3 massive truths I needed to comprehend immediately to survive what was coming. The first truth was a devastating betrayal. Over the final 2 years of Eleanor's life, while her health was rapidly failing and she was heavily medicated, Chloe had been systematically stealing from our life savings. Eleanor instructed me to open the red folder. Inside I found an astonishingly detailed timeline, chronicling exactly how Chloe had quietly moved roughly $340,000 out of our joint retirement accounts. Eleanor had secured copies of the forged withdrawal slips. She had attached sticky notes to the signatures, pointing out how the loops in the cursive letters were too tight, lacking the natural flowing rhythm of Eleanor's actual handwriting. There was even a copy of a fraudulent power of attorney document Chloe had illicitly submitted to our local bank branch, naming herself as the sole financial proxy. Most damning of all were the grainy printed still images from the bank's security cameras. They clearly showed Chloe standing at the teller window, executing the wire transfers while wearing a distinct wool winter coat I had personally bought for her 2 Christmases prior. Eleanor had tracked the stolen money, tracing the complex web of transfers straight into an offshore LLC controlled by Chloe's husband. Eleanor wrote that she had discovered the massive theft 18 months ago, but instead of confronting Chloe, instead of letting her anger show, Eleanor had made a calculated decision to remain entirely silent. She knew that alerting Chloe would cause her to cover her tracks or accelerate her plans to declare us incompetent. So Eleanor let our daughter believe she was getting away with it, choosing instead to quietly build an absolutely airtight, bulletproof legal case against her own child. The second truth Eleanor revealed in the letter centered around a man named Silas Vance. She directed me to the blue folder. Silas Vance was a highly aggressive commercial real estate developer operating out of Hartford. According to Eleanor's notes, Silas and Eleanor possessed a bitter, hidden history that spanned back over 2 decades. In her prime, Eleanor had legally outmaneuvered Silas on a massive zoning dispute in western Massachusetts, effectively killing a highly lucrative strip mall project he had staked his reputation on. Silas had never forgotten the humiliation, and he had never forgiven my wife. Eleanor discovered that Silas had recently tracked down Chloe. He had approached our daughter with a dark, mutually beneficial proposition. Inside the blue folder were printed transcripts of private emails and text messages between Chloe and Silas that Eleanor had managed to intercept through the shared family cloud account. They detailed a horrifying conspiracy. Silas and Chloe had formed an alliance with a singular goal: to declare me legally incompetent, force me into a state-run facility, the very same Oak Haven facility I had found the brochures for, and seize complete conservatorship over my assets. Once Chloe had total legal control over my life, she was going to quietly sell the Asheville Diner property to Silas Vance for an absolute fraction of its actual worth, allowing Silas to steal the land and allowing Chloe to pocket the quick cash without raising any flags during probate. But it was the third truth that forced me to lean back against the dirt wall and gasp for air. Eleanor explained why Silas Vance was suddenly so desperately obsessed with a derelict diner sitting on 11 acres of overgrown brush. She told me to open the yellow folder. Inside were thick stacks of public meeting minutes from the State Department of Transportation, along with heavily redacted surveyor maps and environmental impact studies. For the past 6 years, the state had been quietly planning a massive infrastructure project. They were going to completely widen Route 9 and construct a major multi-lane highway interchange. According to the surveyor blueprints, Eleanor had secured the massive new on-ramp, and commercial access roads were engineered to cut directly across the back 8 acres of the diner's property. Eleanor revealed that she had secretly purchased this specific parcel of land 22 years ago for almost nothing, purely because she had aggressively monitored municipal zoning minutes while everyone else was sleeping. The State Transportation Board had already fully funded the interchange project. They were legally required to acquire the right-of-way through eminent domain. Eleanor had obtained the state's internal appraisal documents, the exact same leaked appraisals that Silas Vance had illegally gotten his hands on. The state was preparing to compensate the legal property owner for the easement and the newly created prime commercial highway frontage. The official state valuation for our supposedly worthless 11 acres was just under $9 million. Eleanor's final set of instructions directed me to the green folder containing the trust documents. She had anticipated every single move Silas and Chloe would make. A year and a half before her death, recognizing the terminal nature of her illness, Eleanor had legally transferred the entire Asheville Diner property, including the 11 acres, into a highly specialized, irrevocable trust. She had named me as the sole, unchallengeable beneficiary. But the true genius of her legal maneuvering was buried deep in the fine print. Eleanor had instructed her attorney Evelyn to draft an incredibly aggressive legal tripwire known as an ethics clause designated as Section 9. The clause explicitly stipulated that if Chloe ever attempted to contest Eleanor's final will, if she ever committed any documented act of financial fraud against the estate, or if she ever engaged in any business transaction whatsoever with Silas Vance regarding the Asheville property, Chloe would instantly trigger a total forfeiture event. She would immediately lose the $2 million lake house, she would lose the Vanguard investment accounts, she would lose the life insurance payout, and she would lose any future claim to the trust. Furthermore, the clause mandated that Evelyn was legally bound to immediately turn over the entire red folder containing irrefutable proof of wire fraud and embezzlement directly to federal prosecutors. Eleanor ended the letter by telling me that she knew this revelation would hurt me more than the cancer was hurting her. She knew I still viewed Chloe as the innocent 6-year-old girl who loved riding her bicycle in the driveway. But Eleanor pleaded with me to see the reality of who our daughter had chosen to become while her mother lay dying. She begged me to protect myself, to not forgive Chloe's cruelty, and to trust the fortress she had spent her final years building around me. I don't know exactly how long I sat in the freezing dirt of that crawl space, completely surrounded by the overwhelming magnitude of my wife's intelligence and her fierce, undeniable love. While I had been sitting peacefully by her bedside, holding her fragile hand and reading aloud from her favorite mystery novels, Eleanor had been commanding a silent, brutal war to ensure my survival. I carefully packed all the folders back into the strongbox, locked it, and climbed the wooden ladder back up into the cold, empty diner. It was late afternoon by then, and the winter sun was rapidly setting, casting long, dark shadows across the cracked linoleum. I was standing near the front counter, trying to process the fact that my entire reality had been reshaped, when I heard the distinct crunch of heavy tires rolling onto the gravel lot outside. I looked through a small tear in the papered window. A beat-up, rusted Ford pickup truck had parked next to my sedan. An older man stepped out. He looked to be in his early 70s, wearing heavily worn Carhartt work pants, a thick flannel shirt, and scuffed work boots. He carried a large thermos in one hand and a brown paper sack in the other. He didn't hesitate. He walked up the front steps and let himself in through the door I had left unlocked. He looked at me for a moment, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, and stated my name. It wasn't a question, it was an absolute certainty. I introduced myself and asked who he was. He told me his name was Harrison and he ran the local agricultural feed store about 3 miles down Route 9. He walked over to the counter and set down the thermos and the paper sack. He explained that Eleanor had quietly tracked him down 2 years ago. She had paid him handsomely to act as a silent caretaker for the diner. He was tasked with mowing the weeds, maintaining the perimeter and aggressively running off any corporate scouts or trespassers who came nosing around the property. Harrison told me that Eleanor had given him very strict instructions. If I ever showed up at the diner alone, he was to bring me hot food, make sure I had heat, and deliver a specific package. He reached into his heavy canvas coat and pulled out a thick, padded envelope. He tossed it onto the counter in front of me. He said Eleanor had given it to him 2 years back, insisting that I would desperately need it when the time came. I opened the envelope. Inside were thick, tightly bound stacks of $100 bills. It was exactly $15,000 in untraceable emergency cash. Before I could even form the words to thank him, Harrison raised a rough, calloused hand to stop me. He told me to thank my wife, noting that she was a woman who thought of absolutely everything. Then his tone shifted to a serious low grumble. He warned me that Chloe, along with a slick, expensive-looking man in a tailored gray suit, had been spotted around the Ashfield County Clerk's office for the past 3 days. They had been aggressively demanding records about the highway easement and the property boundaries. Harrison told me they were circling like vultures and that they would likely drive out to the diner to confront me, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. He looked me dead in the eye and instructed me not to sign a single piece of paper they put in front of my face. He assured me that Evelyn the lawyer had my back legally and he had my back locally. He unpacked the brown sack, leaving me a massive roast beef sandwich and a thermos full of steaming black coffee. He told me he would haul a portable generator out to the property first thing in the morning to get the lights working. Then, without waiting for another word, he turned around, walked out the door, and drove away into the freezing night. I stood at the dusty window eating the sandwich in the dark, staring out at the 11 acres of wild brush that the state of Massachusetts was about to pay $9 million to pave over. For the first time since Eleanor died, the crushing, suffocating weight of isolation lifted from my chest. My wife had built impenetrable walls around me and I was finally standing safely inside them. They arrived exactly 2 days later, just as the early morning frost was beginning to melt off the gravel lot. I was inside the diner drinking coffee from the thermos Harrison had left, when I heard the heavy crunch of tires. I looked through the gap in the papered window. A sleek black luxury sedan pulled up first, followed closely by a pristine silver SUV. Chloe stepped out of the sedan. She was wearing large, expensive sunglasses and a long, tailored camel coat that likely cost more than the diner's annual property taxes. The man who climbed out of the SUV moved with an arrogant, practiced slowness. He had slicked back gray hair, wore a high-end designer vest over a dress shirt, and carried himself like a man who was deeply accustomed to everyone in the room waiting eagerly for his permission to speak. I recognized him instantly from the photographs in Eleanor's blue folder. It was Silas Vance. Before I stepped out to meet them, I took my smartphone off the counter. 2 nights prior, back at the lake house, I had answered a late-night phone call from Chloe. Acting on a sudden paranoid gut instinct, I had immediately muted my end of the line and activated the call recording application. She had thought the call dropped, but the line remained open. I had sat in the dark guest room and listened as she spoke to someone else in the room with her, explicitly detailing their strategy to trick me into signing over the easement before I realized its true value. I had captured every single word, backed the audio file up to the cloud, and memorized the most damning parts. I slid the phone deep into my coat pocket, unlocked the front door, and stepped out onto the rotting wooden porch. the freezing wind biting at my face. Chloe took off her sunglasses and marched toward the steps, stopping a few feet away.
Dad, we really need to talk about this property.
No, we really don't. Silas Vance stepped forward, sliding smoothly between me and my daughter. He wore a perfectly practiced predatory smile. He introduced himself, projecting a false warmth, and told me he was a commercial developer who specialized in distressed properties. He claimed he wanted to do me a massive favor and take this overwhelming burden off my hands. He didn't even wait for me to respond before launching into his pitch. He casually mentioned the exorbitant back taxes, the severe structural liabilities of the sagging roof, and the impossible upkeep of 11 useless acres. Then, with the dramatic flair of a man throwing a bone to a starving dog, he offered me $4 million in cash right on the spot. He promised to handle all the complex legal paperwork, pay off the county liens, and allow me to walk away a completely free and wealthy man. He held out a gold pen, expecting me to fall to my knees in gratitude. I kept my hands firmly in my pockets and simply stared at him. Then I turned my gaze directly to Chloe. "You actually brought him here. You brought Silas Vance to my property."
Dad, please stop being so incredibly stubborn for once in your life. It is an amazing, generous offer. It is honestly 4 times more than this disgusting dump will ever be worth. Just take the money, sign the transfer deed, and go enjoy whatever is left of your life in peace.
Whatever is left of my life. You mean the rest of my life sitting in a shared room in Wing C at the Oak Haven senior residence? Is that where I'm supposed to enjoy my millions? Chloe's jaw tightened visibly. The arrogant posture she had carried since the funeral faltered for a fraction of a second. She glanced nervously at Silas, who maintained his rigid plastic smile, though his eyes narrowed dangerously. I slowly pulled my phone from my coat pocket. I unlocked the screen, opened the audio files, turned the volume up to its absolute maximum, and pressed play. Chloe's own voice erupted from the small speaker, sounding sharp, frantic, and crystal clear in the dead silence of the cold morning air. The recording played her exact words. "We have to secure the easement and the whole back parcel immediately. We get the old man to sign the preliminary transfer before he figures out what the DOT is actually planning for that land. Then we expedite moving him into the Oak Haven facility, and I petition the court to take over as full conservator. Once the guardianship is approved, the land is legally ours to sell to Silas." I hit pause and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The blood drained completely from Chloe's face, leaving her pale and trembling. Silas Vance's predatory smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, calculating panic. "That recording was from 2 nights ago. You really didn't know I was still on the open line, did you? You thought I had hung up." Silas tried to recover his footing. He stepped forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture, attempting to gaslight me right there on the porch. He claimed I was misinterpreting a highly stressful family conversation out of context, and that their primary concern was my declining health and inability to manage a commercial asset. I cut him off immediately. I heard my own daughter actively conspiring to lock me inside a substandard nursing facility so she could steal 11 acres of land out from under my feet and sell it to you. How much were you actually paying her behind my back, Silas? Was it the full $9 million the state is offering, or did you lowball her too?
Dad, you are completely paranoid. You don't understand the complex zoning laws regarding the land under this place. You don't know what you are doing.
The land. You just said it out loud, Chloe. The land under this place. That was the exact moment the third vehicle appeared. A pristine white government-issue SUV crunched loudly up the gravel driveway, parking perpendicular to Silas's vehicle, effectively boxing him in. The doors opened, and Evelyn Voss, my late wife's meticulous estate attorney, stepped out holding a thick leather briefcase. Right behind her emerged a younger man wearing a dark blue windbreaker emblazoned with the official seal of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. He was carrying a thick clipboard bursting with official state blueprints. Evelyn did not look at Chloe or Silas. She walked straight toward the porch, her heels clicking sharply against the frozen ground, and greeted me warmly, noting that we seemed to have unexpected company. Then she turned her undivided attention to Silas Vance. She unlatched her briefcase, pulled out a thick, legally binding document stamped by a federal judge, and shoved it directly against Silas's chest, forcing him to take it. She informed him in a voice as cold as ice that he was officially served with a comprehensive cease and desist order. She explicitly stated that Silas was legally prohibited from contacting me, prohibited from making any unsolicited financial offers regarding the Ashfield property, and prohibited from conducting any business whatsoever connected to this specific parcel of land. Evelyn then delivered the killing blow. She announced that the irrevocable trust executed by Eleanor Whitfield specifically named Silas Vance under the Section 9 Ethics Clause. She warned him that any further attempt to collude with my daughter would trigger immediate federal fraud investigations against his development firm, severely compromising his state contracting licenses. Silas Vance stared at the legal injunction in his trembling hands. For a man who made a living intimidating people, he suddenly had absolutely nothing to say. Evelyn then turned slowly to my daughter. She pulled a second, distinctively red banded legal packet from her briefcase and held it out. Chloe refused to take it, so Evelyn simply dropped it onto the gravel at Chloe's expensive boots. Evelyn announced it was a formal notice of trust violation review. Evelyn looked right into Chloe's terrified eyes and outlined the devastating consequences. She told my daughter that if she pursued a false medical guardianship, if she filed a fraudulent power of attorney, or if she engaged in any further negotiations with Silas Vance, she would instantly trigger the forfeiture clause. Evelyn made it brutally clear. Chloe would lose the $2 million lake house, she would lose the Vanguard accounts, and she would lose the insurance money. Every single cent would legally revert to me within 24 hours. And then Evelyn gestured toward the young man in the state windbreaker. He stepped forward, introduced himself as Mr. Abernathy from the State Department of Transportation, and addressed me directly. He formally confirmed that my late wife Eleanor had successfully filed the complex right-of-way paperwork with the state 18 months ago. He stated that the massive highway interchange project was now fully funded by the legislature, and the state would be issuing a formal and non-negotiable acquisition offer for the rear easement of my property within 60 days. Mr. Abernathy then shot a look of absolute disgust at Silas Vance. He firmly added that the State Transportation Board had noted Silas's competing unauthorized inquiries regarding the parcel, and those inquiries had been officially denied. The state of Massachusetts deals strictly and exclusively with the legal property owner of record, and that owner was me. Silas Vance did not utter another syllable. He realized he had been completely outplayed by a dead woman. He turned around, practically ran to his silver SUV, threw it into gear, and sped off down the driveway, his tires spitting a massive cloud of loose gravel and dirt into the freezing air. Chloe was left standing completely alone in the center of the empty lot. The devastating legal papers fluttered gently in the cold wind by her feet. She looked up at me standing on the elevated porch. Her face was a mask of absolute shock, rapidly crumbling into the realization of her own utter ruin. For one fleeting, agonizing second, I thought she might actually break down. I thought she might offer a genuine apology, or beg for forgiveness, or attempt to explain the monstrous choices she had made over the last 2 years. I waited for the little girl I had raised to finally show herself. But absolutely nothing came. Her pride and her greed were far too deeply entrenched. She simply bent down, snatched the legal papers off the freezing ground, turned her back on me without a single word, and got into her luxury sedan. I stood completely still on the rotting wooden steps of the diner and watched her drive away down Route 9, staring into the distance long after the dust had completely settled back onto the road. Chloe did not surrender quietly, of course. People who are conditioned by a lifetime of unchecked entitlement and deeply ingrained arrogance rarely do. 2 days after she fled the freezing gravel lot of the Ashfield diner in absolute defeat, she launched a desperate, spiteful legal counteroffensive. She aggressively emailed Evelyn Voss, drafting a vicious and highly threatening legal notice to challenge the validity of Eleanor's final will and testament. Her grounds for the challenge were fabricated entirely out of malice. She officially claimed I was severely mentally incompetent, suffering from advanced undocumented cognitive decline, and living in abject squalor as a frail old man in an abandoned, structurally compromised commercial building that possessed no running water or central heat. She painted a horrifyingly false picture of severe elder neglect, attempting to use my self-imposed exile at the derelict diner as definitive proof that I was fundamentally unfit to manage my own daily affairs, let alone oversee a multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition transaction with the state government. Evelyn did not call her on the phone to argue. Evelyn did not invite a mediation session or attempt to negotiate a settlement. Instead, Evelyn replied to the thread with a single, highly concentrated, impeccably drafted paragraph. She politely but firmly reminded my daughter that formally filing any such competency challenge in a probate court of law would instantly and irreversibly trip the Section 9 ethics clause embedded within the irrevocable trust. She reiterated with terrifying legal clarity that the exact moment a petition was filed with the county clerk, Evelyn was legally obligated by her strict fiduciary duty to ship the entire contents of the red folder, the grainy bank security camera stills, the forged Vanguard withdrawal slips with the noticeably tight cursive loops, the illegal offshore wire transfers moving money to her husband's LLC straight to the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for immediate criminal review. Chloe was given a window of exactly 48 hours to decide whether her wounded pride and her unquenchable financial greed were genuinely worth a guaranteed sentence of 12 to 15 years inside a federal penitentiary. The utter silence that followed that email was absolutely deafening. Faced with the absolute destruction of her freedom and her remaining wealth, Chloe withdrew absolutely everything. Her aggressively priced, high-end Boston attorney called Evelyn's office the very next morning. He read a stiff, heavily manicured, legally sanitized statement about his client wishing to unilaterally avoid any further emotional conflict or prolonged litigation during a highly sensitive time of familial mourning. She formally accepted the terms of the estate. She kept the $2 million lake house, she kept the Vanguard investment accounts, and she kept the life insurance policy payout. I kept the supposedly worthless Ashfield diner. Later that same evening, I received one final direct email from Chloe. It was as incredibly cold and entirely sterile as a computerized bank statement. There was absolutely no apology buried anywhere in the text. There was no internal reflection, no lingering remorse for actively attempting to lock her own father inside the horrific Oak Haven facility, and absolutely no acknowledgement of her mother's staggering protective genius. It simply read, "We are officially done here. Do not attempt to contact me or my husband ever again under any circumstances. I need to move forward with my life and protect my family's peace." I sat alone at the rusted, grease-stained counter of the empty diner, staring at the glowing screen of my smartphone in the dark, and I wrote back exactly 4 sentences. I told her that she had cowardly stolen money from her own mother, while her mother was upstairs in a rented hospital bed, actively and painfully dying of terminal cancer. I told her that she had maliciously forged a dying woman's signature and actively plotted with her mother's worst professional enemy to cage her own father in a horrific facility that smelled of bleach and absolute despair. I told her that as of this moment she was absolutely no daughter of mine, and that if she ever dared to cross my path, drive onto my property, or contact me again in this lifetime, I would personally hand the red folder directly to the federal prosecutors myself, ethics clause or no ethics clause. Then, with a profound sense of finality, I permanently blocked her phone number, her email address and her husband's contact information from my life. I walked out onto the rotting wooden steps of the diner, sat down in the freezing winter air, and waited for the crushing, suffocating wave of parental grief to finally wash over me. I waited to mourn the absolute and total death of my family unit, but the grief never came. What arrived instead was something much quieter, much steadier, and infinitely more profound. It felt exactly like a severe, life-threatening fever finally breaking after weeks of terrifying delirium. An hour later, Harrison's rusted Ford pickup truck rolled slowly into the gravel lot. He didn't ask any probing questions about the SUV that had sped away earlier, nor did he ask about the legal papers. He simply stepped out of the heavy truck, walked up the creaking wooden steps, and sat down right next to me in the freezing cold, handing me a cold glass bottle of root beer. We sat in companionable silence for a very long time, watching the harsh winter wind whip fiercely through the 11 acres of wild, overgrown brush. After a while, Harrison cleared his throat and spoke. He told me that Eleanor had spoken to him once over a cup of terrible burnt coffee down at his agricultural feed store about her deepest, most painful regrets in life. She had quietly confessed to Harrison that she had spent years staying awake late into the night, staring blankly at the bedroom ceiling, desperately trying to figure out exactly where she had lost her little girl to such a cold, calculating darkness. She had agonizingly reviewed every single parenting decision, every moment of discipline, every missed dinner, and every moment of absence. Harrison had looked at her and told her that maybe she hadn't lost the girl at all. Maybe the girl just simply looked at the vast map of her life and actively, consciously chose a dark, selfish road entirely of her own making. Eleanor had nodded slowly, taking a sip of her coffee, and said something I will absolutely never forget. She said, "No, some people are simply born with a massive echoing hollow space inside them, wanting far more out of the world than human love can ever possibly feel. And that is not a mother's failure. That is a person's absolute choice." I sat with that profound, heavy truth for a very long time on those steps. It was the most honest, liberating thing anyone had ever said to me. This is exactly what I desperately want anyone listening to this story to deeply understand. For 30 agonizing days, I lived trapped inside a tiny guest room inside my own home, treated by my own flesh and blood like an inconvenient piece of broken furniture that someone simply forgot to drag out to the curb for the garbage collectors. And the entire time I was confined in that room, listening to the contractor stir up my memories, I kept turning my soul completely inside out, utterly convinced that I must have done something terribly wrong to deserve such cruelty. I convinced myself that if I had just been a better father, if I had worked fewer hours grading math papers, if I had been more emotionally present, she wouldn't have turned out so completely and devastatingly cold. That specific brand of guilt is the ultimate lie that keeps good, decent people small, manageable, and perpetually trapped in toxic cycles. Walking away from a grown child who actively treats you like a heavy, unwanted burden is not your failure as a parent. It is absolutely not a sin against your family. It is a direct, unavoidable consequence of a choice that child independently made. And you are entirely legally and morally allowed to stop bleeding out for their deliberate mistakes. Eleanor knew that. She had made her absolute, unflinching peace with it long before I ever had the courage to face it. And because she loved me with a fierce, unparalleled loyalty, she spent the last 2 agonizing years of her life quietly building me an impenetrable fortress of legal, financial protection so that I would be safe enough to finally learn that lesson for myself when she was gone. But there is a secondary, equally vital lesson buried in the cold dirt of that crawl space, one that goes far beyond simple morality and forgiveness. Eleanor didn't defeat my daughter and a ruthless corporate shark like Silas Vance with mere kindness, passive forgiveness, or hoping for the best. She defeated them by paying incredibly close, relentless attention to the harsh reality of the world around her. She painstakingly read the obscure, incredibly boring Department of Transportation board minutes that absolutely nobody else ever bothered to look at. She watched her own daughter orchestrate a massive, heartless financial theft for 18 entire months without ever once flinching, holding her absolute silence so she could meticulously build a legal case airtight enough to hold up in a federal courtroom. She saw exactly who our daughter had chosen to become, abandoning all parental delusion, and she planned around that horrifying reality with a clear, ruthlessly cold, and highly strategic mind. Goodness, kindness, and decency give you the right moral aim in life, but clear, unclouded, highly tactical thinking is what actually allows you to hit the target when the wolves come to the door. You desperately need both to survive in this world, and most folks only ever bother to bring one. And then there is the emotional muscle of absolute resilience. I had to physically tear up a $20,000 certified bank check when I had absolutely nothing to my name. I had to stay in a hostile, deeply toxic house until the legal clock ran out, ensuring my record remained spotless. I had to drive 2 hours into the unknown rural hills, not knowing what physical or emotional state awaited me. And I had to stand firmly on a freezing porch and play an audio recording of my own child plotting my ultimate demise straight to her arrogant face. None of that was easy. Every single cell in my aging body desperately wanted to take the buyout money and quietly disappear into the background, staying comfortably upright when it would have been so much easier to just fold, surrender, and let the predators win. But standing your ground is a physical and mental muscle. You only build it by actively using it when it hurts the most. Keep your hands completely clean, even when no one would ever catch you dirty in them. Keep your eyes completely open. And always think 2 strategic moves ahead of the people trying to bury you. The formal financial offer from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts came through late that following autumn, after the legal sale of the rear easement and the newly minted prime commercial highway frontage to the state, and after all the complex capital gains and state property taxes were fully and legally settled by Evelyn, the trust account cleared just over $6 million in pure liquid capital. I will tell you exactly what I did with the Asheville Diner property. I absolutely did not bulldoze it. I hired Harrison and a massive crew of his local, hard-working tradesmen friends to completely gut the interior of the building down to the wooden studs. We put a brand new, heavily reinforced commercial roof on it. We installed massive, energy-efficient double-paned windows that let the beautiful morning sun pour over the counter. We built a state-of-the-art commercial kitchen equipped with the best griddles money could buy. We polished the original linoleum floors until they shined, and we reupholstered every single booth in deep, rich, comfortable crimson vinyl. I officially reopened the doors to the public the following spring. The faded, weather-beaten sign out front used to say roses, so roses it respectfully stayed. We serve incredibly thick black coffee, perfectly cooked, farm-fresh eggs, and massive hearty meals. It has rapidly become a warm, vibrant sanctuary where the local farmers, diesel mechanics, and working-class folks sit at dawn sharing stories before their grueling shifts begin. I keep the menu prices aggressively low. Prices a working man with a family can actually afford without thinking twice about his wallet. The diner actively loses a little bit of money every single month, subsidized entirely by the trust, and I honestly do not care in the slightest. Eleanor left me an absolute fortune and an empty, rotting building, and what she truly meant for me to find inside both of them was a concrete, undeniable reason to get out of bed in the morning and engage with the world. The vast majority of the millions went straight into a dedicated, highly structured philanthropic trust fund established entirely in Eleanor's name. We provide massive, full-ride college scholarships for the bright, hard-working kids out here in the forgotten rural hills who could never otherwise afford the crippling tuition of the state university system. We also provide massive anonymous financial grants for local families who are suddenly forced to drive 2 hours into Boston multiple times a week for expensive pediatric cancer treatments, helping them exactly the way Eleanor and I used to desperately need help when we watched the crushing medical bills aggressively stack up on our own kitchen table years ago. I live on very little, residing in a small comfortable cabin I built on the remaining property, and I give away a whole lot. There is a young, brilliant girl who comes into the diner almost every single morning now. She is 18 years old, sharp as a tack, and she is heading off to study advanced civil engineering at a premier university next fall, entirely funded by one of Eleanor's scholarships. Last week, she sat at the counter eating a plate of blueberry pancakes and earnestly told me that she wants to build massive highways when she graduates. I almost laughed out loud, the beautiful, poetic irony of it echoing loudly in the diner. I looked at her, smiled, and told her to make sure she builds them straight, and more importantly, to ensure she builds them where they actually help people connect to one another. She had absolutely no idea why that specific piece of advice landed with the profound emotional weight that it did. Some nights, long after the final customers have driven away and I have securely locked the heavy front doors, I sit completely alone at the polished Formica counter. The main overhead fluorescent lights are switched off, leaving only the soft, warm humming glow of the neon pie case illuminating the room. I pour myself half a cup of decaf coffee. And I talk to my wife out loud, speaking into the quiet space, just as if she were sitting on the red vinyl stool right beside me. I tell her that the diner is completely full every morning with good, honest people. I tell her that the massive new state highway interchange is officially coming through the back acreage, cutting right exactly where she mathematically calculated it would 2 decades ago. I tell her that I finally completely understand what she meant with her dying breath in that bedroom. She didn't just leave me a dilapidated commercial building on Route 9. She left me an absolute brilliant blueprint for survival in a harsh world. She left me a profound way to start completely over at 68 years old with my hands incredibly full of purpose instead of being poisoned by bitterness, anger and regret. My daughter Chloe ultimately chose her road, driven entirely by insatiable greed, cruelty and entitlement. I chose my road, paved entirely by the fierce, protective love and staggering foresight of an extraordinary woman. And out here on Route 9, where the massive new state on-ramp curves beautifully across a parcel of land that absolutely everybody swore was worthless, I wake up every single morning before the sun rises. I walk up the wooden steps, I unlock that heavy old brass lock and I trust the diner. I trust the diner with my whole heart because the brilliant, loving woman who left it to me never once steered me wrong.